A construction worker raised his hand and asked a single question, and the entire $200 million project came to a sudden halt. Houston, Texas. The morning sun lit up rows of heavy machinery standing guard around the foundation of what was to become the city's newest skyscraper, an 80-story luxury tower hailed as the next icon of America's oil capital. Investors had poured more than $200 million into the project, with a strict 20-month deadline. Among the noise of drills, cranes, and concrete mixers, engineers and architects worked day and night to keep the progress on track. In the middle of all the chaos stood a middle-aged man in a faded orange vest and a scratched-up white helmet. His name was Mike Carter. He'd been working in construction since he was 18. His hands were rough, his skin sunburned, and his eyes sharp from decades of real-world experience. He didn't have a college degree. No diplomas hung on the walls of his modest home. But Mike had something most others didn't, an insatiable curiosity. Mike wasn't the kind of worker who just followed orders. During lunch breaks, he read old technical manuals, redrew blueprints on the back of shopping receipts, and jotted down questions in a small notepad he always carried. Most of his co-workers thought he was odd, even amusing, but Mike didn't care. He believed that understanding the work he did was a form of respect to his craft. That morning, Mike was monitoring a concrete delivery for the ground floor when something made him pause. A group of engineers and project managers had gathered inside a portable meeting trailer on the northern side of the site. Usually, Mike had no interest in what went on in there. But this time, something was off. Their faces were serious, tense, almost panicked. Curious, Mike moved closer. Not to eavesdrop, just to get a sense of what was happening. Through a small gap in the door, he caught fragments of their conversation. Something about rising soil pressure, foundation shift, and drainage pipe failure. He didn't understand all the technical jargon, but one thing was clear. Something had gone wrong. A technician soon stepped out to grab more blueprints. Mike approached him politely and asked, "The problems of the base, right? The foundation supports." The tech replied quickly, "Yeah. Groundwater's pushing support beams out of alignment." Then rushed back inside. Mike stared toward the foundation. He remembered something. 2 weeks ago, he had helped a crew install drainage pipes around the outer edge of the load zone. He had quietly wondered at the time why the pipes weren't placed directly beneath the pressure points. But he hadn't said anything. It wasn't his place. Now it all started to make sense. Something about it just didn't sit right. Slowly, Mike walked toward the meeting trailer. For the first time, he decided to speak up. "Mr. Ethan," he said, gently lifting his helmet. "Sorry if I'm wrong, but if the groundwater's building up under supports, why are the pipes placed on the outside instead of right underneath?" The room fell silent. Ethan Kessler, the young project manager and an Ivy League graduate, turned with disbelief in his eyes. He looked Mike up and down, then let out a sarcastic laugh. "You're serious? Mike, this isn't some backyard shed. We use real math here, not gut feelings from guys with hammers." A few others in the room chuckled. Mike stood still, saying nothing more. But deep down, he had a strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, his question wasn't so wrong. And at that very moment, something quietly began to shift, not just in the structure of the building, but in the story that was about to unfold. The next morning, construction on the tower slowed to a crawl. Workers stood around idly, waiting for new instructions. Deliveries were being delayed. Heavy equipment sat unused. Something big was happening, but no one knew exactly what. Inside the project office, Ethan slammed his fist on the conference table. The structural integrity report had just come in, and the news was worse than expected. Soil pressure under the foundation was rising faster than predicted. Worse yet, the drainage system, approved months ago by both the design team and consultants, was failing to redirect the underground water. According to the new models, if no action was taken soon, the steel base supports could warp or collapse. And that would mean pausing the project for at least 9 months. The projected cost of the delay? Over $20 million. "This can't be happening," Ethan muttered, pacing the room. "We followed every protocol." The head engineer, Roger Lee, flipped through the pages of the report, then shook his head. We may have overlooked the water flow pattern under core slab. It's not draining toward the outer lines. It's pooling right beneath the low points. Ethan clenched his jaw. So you're saying Mike the construction guy might have been right? Roger hesitated. I'm saying his question makes more sense today than it did yesterday. Outside, Mike continued working like nothing had happened. He didn't bring up what occurred the day before. He just kept doing his job, loading bricks, checking the curing of concrete, and writing notes in his little pad. But the way people looked at him was different now. Curious, hesitant. A rumor had started spreading, one that reached all corners of the site by noon. The drainage issue Mike questioned might be the actual root of the structural problem. People whispered his name, some laughing nervously, others seriously wondering if the guy they mocked yesterday had seen something none of the engineers did. In the afternoon, a white SUV pulled into the site. It carried someone no one expected to arrive so soon, Dr. Claudia Wu, a renowned structural consultant brought in from out of state. Sharp-minded, calm, and known for her willingness to challenge conventional thinking, she was flown in as a last resort. Even Ethan seemed nervous when she entered the trailer. Dr. Wu, he greeted, shaking her hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. She got straight to the point. I've reviewed the models you sent. I'll need to inspect the core section myself. And I heard there was a worker who raised a concern. Ethan looked uneasy. Yes, well, a laborer. He made a suggestion yesterday, but he's not part of the engineering team. I'd still like to hear what he said, Claudia replied. Ethan gave a tight nod. His name's Mike Carter. He's out there by the west slab. Moments later, Mike was called into the trailer. Confused but calm, he stepped inside and removed his helmet. Mr. Carter, Claudia said. I'm Dr. Wu. I'd like you to explain what you observed. Mike blinked. You want my input? Yes, she said with a faint smile. From the beginning, please. And just like that, for the first time in his career, Mike was invited to speak in a room full of engineers and specialists. His voice was steady but modest. It just seemed strange to me that the drainage lines were laid outside the main pressure zone. I thought if the water builds up under the supports, it would make more sense to put the pipes directly beneath them, let the water escape from where it's actually collecting. Claudia didn't interrupt. She listened carefully. When Mike finished, she asked for foundation plans and began cross-referencing his suggestion with the most recent sensor data. After a long silence, she turned toward the team. Run a simulation with a revised drainage system, she ordered. Assume outlet points under each core footing. I want results in 2 hours. The room snapped into action. Ethan stood frozen, his jaw clenched. For the first time, someone had taken Mike seriously, and not just anyone. It was the most respected voice on the project. And behind her calm expression, Dr. was beginning to suspect that this construction worker might have just saved the entire tower. As the sun began to set over Houston, the project trailer was buzzing with activity. Monitors flashed with simulations, engineers shouted numbers across the room, and stacks of revised blueprints lay scattered on tables. All eyes were on the new drainage model, one that was based on Mike's simple observation. Mike, however, wasn't in the trailer anymore. He had gone back to his routine, quietly helping reinforce steel cages for the next concrete pour. While the professionals debated, he kept his head down and hands busy. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't expect anyone to take his ideas seriously. But inside the trailer, the atmosphere shifted. Roger Lee leaned over Claudia Wu's shoulder as she stared at the updated simulation on her tablet. The digital model showed the redesigned layout. Drainage pipes placed directly beneath each high-pressure support point. The effect was immediate. Water dispersion improved by over 70%, and structural strain dropped significantly. These numbers are solid, Roger whispered. This fixes the hydrostatic load problem. Claudia nodded, and we wouldn't have seen it if no one asked that question. Ethan, who had been standing silently near the window, finally spoke up. So what now? We changed the whole design because a laborer made a guess. Roger frowned. No, we changed the design because his logic is sound and the data confirms it. Claudia added firmly, this wasn't a guess. It was an observation based on field knowledge. Something your team should have cross-checked months ago. Ethan's face flushed, but he said nothing. That night, Claudia requested a full inspection of the foundation zones and ordered a halt to further concrete pouring until the changes could be evaluated on-site. The delay would cost a few days, but would prevent millions in future damage. The next morning, word spread like wildfire. Did you hear? Mike's idea might have saved the whole tower. No way. They're really using his plan. Dr. Wu herself confirmed it. The guy with the notebook is smarter than all of them. Mike became the talk of the job site. Workers who used to laugh at his habit of scribbling notes now watched him with a mix of respect and disbelief. Foreman asked for his opinion. Engineers nodded at him in the hallways. Later that afternoon, a local news crew showed up to cover a story they thought would be about rising construction costs. But what they found instead was a viral headline waiting to happen. As the camera rolled, the reporter asked Claudia Wu, "We've heard a worker on site made a key suggestion that changed the direction of this project. Can you confirm that?" Claudia looked directly into the lens. Yes. Mike Carter asked one question no one else thought to ask. And that question revealed a critical flaw in the design. The next day, the video clip exploded online. Blue-collar worker outsmarts engineers. Saves $20 million project. Across the country, viewers shared the story. Some praised Mike's humility. Others criticized the engineering team for dismissing his insight. But most people agreed on one thing. Experience in the field still matters. Meanwhile, Mike kept his head down. The fame didn't interest him. What didn't matter was that the building would be safe, and that maybe, just maybe, asking the right question at the right time could change everything. What Mike didn't know was that this was only the beginning. On the fourth day after the incident, the entire construction site had transformed. The workflow had resumed, but with new energy, new caution, and an undeniable new hierarchy. This time, everyone was watching two people. Dr. Claudia Wu, who now oversaw every major decision, and Mike Carter, the worker whose question had exposed a $20 million oversight. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the executive trailer, Ethan Kessler sat in his office chair, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on his laptop screen. Emails from corporate piled up, each one more urgent than the last. The board wanted answers. The investors were nervous. And worst of all, his name had appeared in several articles, not for praise, but as a project manager who mocked the man who saved the site. Ethan slammed his laptop shut. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Roger. "We've got a situation. Media's outside again, and Claudia wants you in the core zone for the redesign walkthrough." Ethan sighed. "Great. Let's go celebrate Mike the genius, shall we?" Roger didn't reply. He just turned and walked away. On the construction floor, Mike was helping remeasure the trench layout when Claudia waved him over. "Mike," she said, handing him a rolled-up blueprint. "This is a revised drainage plan. I want your opinion on the install order. Does this match what you saw underground?" Mike unrolled the paper, scanning it slowly. "Yeah, looks right. We'll have to dig a little deeper under the east pillar, but the rest should drain smooth if the soil layers hold." Claudia smiled. "Good. I'll let you explain that to the engineers." Mike looked up, startled. "Me?" "You saw it first," she said. "You understand it better than anyone." Before Mike could respond, a voice cut in from behind them. "This is ridiculous," Ethan muttered. "We're seriously letting a guy with no degree advise the engineering team?" Everyone froze. Claudia turned to face him. "Yes, we are, because he saw what all of us missed. Your pride won't change that." Ethan laughed bitterly. "So now what?" "We put him in charge." "We put the building first," Claudia said calmly. "And right now, that means listening to the man who prevented catastrophe." Without another word, she handed the new plans to Mike, then walked away to join a group of inspectors. Ethan stood there, humiliated. But the sting wasn't just from being corrected in front of others. It was from realizing that somewhere along the way, he had stopped listening, stopped questioning, and started believing his title made him untouchable. Across the site, workers paused to watch the moment unfold. Some nodded in approval. Others whispered quietly. The underdog had just outmaneuvered the man at the top, and done it without ever raising his voice. But even as the new plans were set in motion, a new challenge loomed, because the final test was coming. And this time it would be live, real-time, and irreversible. For days later, the sun had barely risen when trucks began rolling into the site with new materials. Reinforced drainage pipes, specialized connectors, and soil stability sensors were delivered one after another. The site had never moved with such urgency. The revised blueprint, now officially labeled a Carter revision, had been approved by the Structural Committee and signed off by Dr. Claudia Wu. It was a bold shift, not just technically, but symbolically. An uncredentialed laborer's idea had become the new backbone of a multi-million-dollar project. At the center of it all, Mike stood quietly in a reflective vest, holding a tablet with the new installation sequence. Claudia had insisted he be part of the implementation team, not just as a worker, but as an advisor, something unheard of in Mike's 30 years on job sites. As the trench crews prepared for excavation, Mike gave the signal to begin. He paced carefully along the chalked-out lines, checking depth markers and verifying drainage slopes. Nearby, engineers took notes. Camera crews were kept behind barriers, but they captured every move. Ethan watched from the second-floor balcony of the admin building, arms folded, jaw tight. He had been sidelined from field command, reassigned temporarily to coordination tasks. It was humiliating, but there was nothing he could do. Every higher-up now answered to Claudia, who had made it very clear. We follow facts, not egos. By mid-morning, the pipes were being lowered into place. Mike crouched beside one of the units and called over a young technician. "See this ridge?" he said, pointing to a slight warp on the connector. "If we leave it like that, water might backflow here during heavy storms." The technician nodded. "You want me to refit it?" "Yeah," Mike said. "Just shave it and seal again. We'll avoid headaches later." Over the course of the day, dozens of small adjustments were made based on Mike's observations. He didn't bark orders. He asked questions. And people listened, because every correction made the system stronger. At sunset, the first test began. A portable water system pumped controlled amounts of water into the soil under the main pressure zone. Sensors monitored the flow rates, structural load, and lateral soil movement. The crew gathered around a display monitor. 5%, 10%, 20% capacity. Roger Lee whispered, "Watching this is more stressful than any boardroom meeting I've been in." Claudia didn't blink. Her eyes stayed on the numbers. 40%, no movement. 60%, drainage rates normal. Soil pressure within safe range. 80%, minor shift, well within expected tolerance. Then 100%. The room held its breath. The graph held steady. Claudia exhaled slowly, then turned to the team. It worked! Cheers erupted from the crowd. Workers clapped. Engineers smiled and shook hands. Even the toughest foreman let out a whoop. And Mike? He just stood there, eyes on the screen, letting the numbers sink in. His idea had held, not just in theory, not just in simulation, but under real-world stress. Someone handed him a bottle of water. Someone else clapped him on the back. But in that moment, what Mike felt wasn't pride or victory. It was relief. Relief that the building would stand, that no one would get hurt, that someone like him, without a title, without recognition, could still make a difference. The test was complete. But something much bigger was only just beginning. 2 days after the successful test, the construction site had settled into a new rhythm. Materials were moving again, teams were smiling, and deadlines, once feared impossible, now looked reachable. But something else was happening, too. Something Mike wasn't prepared for. His name had gone viral. The short interview clip of Dr. Claudia Wu, saying Mike Carter asked a question no one else did, had spread across social media, engineering forums, and even mainstream news outlets. The headline from one article had captured national attention. Construction worker saves $20 million project with one question. It had been shared over 1 million times in 48 hours. Reporters began arriving at the site. Local, regional, Even national outlets requested interviews. Mike tried to avoid them, but eventually, Claudia convinced him to sit down for one segment. Just speak honestly, she told him. That's what people connected with in the first place. So there he sat, at a fold-out table under the temporary shade of a steel canopy, wearing his work vest and dusty boots, facing a smiling reporter and a camera. The reporter leaned forward. "Mike, how does it feel knowing your idea may have saved millions of dollars and weeks of construction time?" Mike scratched his chin. "I didn't think of it that way. I just saw something that didn't look right and asked." "But you're not an engineer," she continued. "No formal training?" "Nope," he said plainly. "I read books, watched videos, and I paid attention." The reporter smiled. "A lot of people say you proved that experience matters just as much as education." Mike shrugged. "I don't know about all that. I just think anyone can see a problem if they're close enough to it." Behind the scenes, producers were already clipping the quote. Anyone can see a problem if they're close enough to it. It became a tagline, a meme, a slogan. Even engineering schools began sharing it on their social pages. And the effect didn't stop there. Across America, conversations were shifting about how blue-collar knowledge and white-collar theory could work together, about listening to voices on the ground, about how genius sometimes wears a hard hat instead of a tie. Ethan, meanwhile, watched the interview from his laptop in the admin trailer. Alone, he'd been pulled from decision-making roles entirely, pending a formal review. His name was no longer associated with the project publicly, and despite his background, his degrees, his connections, he had become the footnote in someone else's story. But the most surprising part? He wasn't angry anymore. He was reflective. Watching Mike speak with humility, Ethan realized something uncomfortable. He hadn't just underestimated Mike. He had underestimated the very idea that brilliance could come from the unexpected. That night, Mike walked home with a plastic bag of groceries and his same old backpack slung over his shoulder. The city lights reflected off the glass of the rising skyscraper behind him. He didn't feel like a hero, but that tower now stood because of one simple question. And the world was starting to ask more questions too. The following week, the corporate office of the development firm called a special meeting. The location, a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the 31st floor of a midtown tower, far from dust, drills, and concrete mixers. Mike Carter had never stepped foot in a place like this. He sat at the far end of a polished mahogany table, still wearing his work boots and denim jeans, his hard hat respectfully left at the door. Seated around him were executives in suits, project stakeholders, legal advisors, and, of course, Dr. Claudia Wu. A senior vice president cleared his throat and stood. "We called this meeting to formally acknowledge the extraordinary contribution of Mr. Mike Carter. Without his attention to detail and courage to speak up, we would be looking at a catastrophic delay and tens of millions in losses." He gestured toward a legal folder in front of Mike. "In this folder is a formal commendation, a bonus check, and, should you accept it, an offer for a new position within our company. We'd like to bring you on as a full-time field analyst with a direct advisory role to our engineering teams." Mike looked stunned. "Me? Working here?" Claudia smiled. "We need more people like you close to the decisions, the ones who see problems before the numbers catch up." The room nodded in agreement. Mike slowly opened the folder. Inside was a check with more zeros than he'd ever seen at once. Below it, an employment offer that doubled his current pay and included benefits he never thought he'd have. But the money wasn't what made his hands tremble. It was the realization that someone believed in him enough to give him a seat at the table. He looked up. "I appreciate it," he said. "I really do. But only if I still get to go to the site. I'm not much for desks." The room laughed. The VP nodded. "That can be arranged." When the meeting ended, Mike stepped into the hallway and took a long breath. He could still smell the faint scent of fresh carpet and air conditioning. It didn't feel like home. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe home was where the work was honest. Later that evening, back on the construction site, Mike returned to his crew. They clapped when he walked up. Some jokingly saluted. Others just grinned. "Did they give you a crown?" one guy asked. "No," Mike chuckled. Just a new title. Still got to show up early tomorrow." They laughed as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The tower they were building stood taller than ever, not just in height, but in meaning. It was no longer just a monument of steel and glass. It was proof that even the quietest voice can echo through the tallest walls. And from now on, Mike Carter's voice would always be heard. 2 weeks passed. The foundation work was complete. The drainage system, once the source of chaos, was now the most stable component of the entire tower. Inspections showed 0 anomalies. The board sent champagne, but the workers preferred strong coffee and clean boots. Mike, now officially titled Field Systems Advisor, had become a trusted bridge between the engineers and the hands-on crews. He wore a small ID badge around his neck now, but he still carried his old, battered notebook in his back pocket. One afternoon, while walking the site with a new group of junior engineers, Mike stopped by the base of the southern tower wing. He knelt beside the edge of the slab and pointed. "See this discoloration here?" he asked. "That means the mix was too wet. We'll need to recheck the slump tests on the next delivery." The engineers leaned in, impressed. One of them, a recent graduate from Georgia Tech, scribbled notes frantically. "I didn't even notice that," she said. Mike smiled. "You will. Just takes time. The concrete talks if you know how to listen." A few steps away, Claudia watched with quiet pride. Mike wasn't just being heard. He was teaching, empowering, elevating those around him. She walked up beside him. "How does it feel, being the one others look to?" Mike shrugged. "Still feels strange. But I get why it matters now." She nodded. "You've built something stronger than concrete, Mike. You built trust." Word of Mike's story had spread far beyond Houston. Construction companies across the country began reevaluating how they handled site feedback. Some launched ground truth programs. Others held listening sessions between foremen and designers. Universities invited Mike to speak, not as a lecturer, but as an example. Students leaned forward when he spoke, not because he used big words, but because he didn't need to. He spoke with clarity, with humility, and with the weight of someone who had stood in the dirt and made the steel hold firm. Back at the site, progress continued. The skeleton of the building rose floor by floor. Glass began covering the exterior. The skyline changed, and so did the lives of those who built it. Mike still showed up early, still worked with his hands, still asked questions. But now, when he spoke, entire departments listened. And on more than one occasion, they changed course based on what he saw. Not because he had a degree, but because he had vision. On a gray Thursday morning, 3 luxury black sedans rolled into the construction site's restricted zone. Out stepped 4 high-level executives, 2 from the development group, 1 from the investment bank backing the project, and 1 from a global engineering consultancy. They weren't here for a tour. They were here to meet the man whose name had been circling their boardrooms. The wind picked up slightly as the men walked toward the mobile conference unit. Claudia met them at the door, flanked by 2 lead engineers. "We're making up time," she said confidently, "and under budget." One of the men raised an eyebrow. "Due to the drainage redesign?" Claudia nodded, and the man who proposed it. "Dr. Wu," said one investor carefully. "We'd like to meet Mr. Carter in person." Across the site, Mike stood ankle-deep in gravel dust, helping position a support beam with 2 other workers. He didn't even notice the suits approaching until one of them called his name. He turned confused. Yes, sir." The executive extended a hand. "Mike Carter, I'm David Robinson. My firm is the primary capital investor in this project. I've read the entire report on your intervention. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." Mike hesitated, wiping dust from his glove before shaking hands. "Just did what made sense, sir." "No," Robinson said, "you did what others were too proud or too distracted to see. And you asked a question that saved all of us a lot of time and a great deal of money." The other investors nodded. Another one stepped forward. "Our group handles multiple developments across the country. We'd like to consult with you, personally, on a few of them." Mike blinked. "Me?" "Yes, your instinct is rare, and frankly invaluable. Claudia stepped in. Mike is staying on this project until it's complete, but I'd be open to seconding him under the right agreement. Mike chuckled nervously. I don't know about all that. I've never been on a plane. The group laughed, but the offers were real. They handed Mike a card, a formal letter of thanks, and a signed plaque recognizing his contribution to the project's recovery and success. After they left, Claudia walked with Mike back toward the materials depot. That's a first, she said. Investment bankers coming down to thank a construction worker in person. Wasn't just me, Mike said. A lot of guys on the site work hard. They just don't always get the chance to speak up. Claudia looked at him. You gave them that chance. The tower was now 65% complete. Its glass shimmered in the afternoon light, and its frame stood unshakable, just like the reputation of the man who had once only been a quiet worker with a notebook in his pocket. But as they reached the staging area, another surprise was waiting. A reporter from a national business network stood with a cameraman already filming. Mr. Carter, the reporter said, just one quick question for our live segment. How does it feel to go from a construction crew member to the man who saved the skyline? Mike smiled softly, then looked up at the tower that now seemed to rise into the clouds. Feels like I just did my job, he said. And maybe next time someone else will get a chance to do the same. 3 days later, in a mid-sized auditorium at the Texas Association of Engineers conference, a packed crowd waited in silence as a keynote speaker approached the podium. But this wasn't a tenured professor, not a CEO, not even a licensed engineer. It was Mike Carter. He walked onto the stage in a clean button-up shirt, jeans, and work boots, holding nothing but his old, weathered notebook in one hand. He looked out over the sea of faces, professionals, academics, students, and paused for a long moment before speaking. My name's Mike, he said, and I'm not supposed to be up here. The room chuckled lightly. I didn't go to college. I didn't pass calculus. But I've been on job sites longer than some of you have been alive. I poured concrete in 100-degree heat, hammered steel in freezing wind, and seen buildings rise and sometimes crack because of small things everyone missed. He held up the notebook. This is my education. Every time I didn't understand something, I wrote it down. Every time I saw something go wrong, I made a note. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it so I wouldn't repeat the same mistake twice. A slide behind him lit up. It showed the original blueprint of the faulty drainage system, then the revised version bearing his hand-drawn suggestion. This sketch wasn't about being smarter, Mike said. It was about paying attention. It was about asking a question that nobody else asked. The audience grew quiet again. No one moved. Mike looked down, then back up, and yeah, I was laughed at. I was told to stay in my lane. But that question saved a $200 million tower. He paused. So, if you take anything from me today, let it be this. Don't just trust the plan. Trust the people close enough to see the cracks. When he finished, the applause didn't stop. In fact, it turned into a standing ovation. Claudia Wu, watching from the second row, wiped the corner of her eye. She had spoken at dozens of conferences, but none had ever landed like this one. After the event, engineers and students swarmed Mike, asking for advice, shaking his hand, even asking for selfies. A young woman from Arizona State University walked up last. Mr. Carter, she said, I changed my major because of your story. Mike looked surprised. Really? Yeah, she said. I wanted to be an architect. Now I want to do structural engineering. I want to be the kind of person who listens to workers like you. He smiled, overwhelmed but proud. Outside, the sun was setting behind the buildings of downtown Austin. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had tilted slightly, just enough for people to look a little closer, listen a little harder, trust a little deeper. Mike Carter didn't break the rules. He rewrote the blueprint, not on paper, but in people's minds. Just when everything seemed to be moving forward, a new crisis struck the site. It was a Saturday afternoon when the alert came in. An unexpected pressure spike from a nearby underground water channel had caused a partial soil shift under the eastern wing of the tower. Nothing had collapsed, but 3 key sensors triggered warnings. Engineers scrambled. Mike, who had taken a day off to visit his sister's house across town, got the call at 2:14 p.m. By 2:45. He was back at the site, boots laced, notebook in hand, scanning real-time data on a field tablet. "What's the damage?" he asked. "No structural compromise," replied Roger Lee, who had stayed behind that weekend. "But the water diverted under Zone E8. We didn't reinforce the secondary slope well enough. It's flooding that trench." Mike frowned. "You're saying the water jumped the drain line?" Roger nodded. "Exactly that." Mike grabbed a nearby marker and began drawing over the digital plan. "Then we don't need to reinforce the slope. We need to redirect the pressure. We open both maintenance hatches near the pillar and install a bypass pipe under the floor plate. Create a fast channel out. That could flood the lower retention tank," someone pointed out. "Not if we raise the gate and cycle it in short intervals." Mike said, "It'll act like a pulse. 5-minute drain cycles. 2 per hour." Everyone stared. No one objected. Roger looked at him. "Can you lead it?" Mike nodded. "Give me 4 guys in 2 hours." At 3:05 p.m., the new emergency pipe was being installed. By 5:18 p.m., the trench was clear, the water was flowing, and the pressure readings were back in the green. When the board found out Monday morning, they didn't react with panic. They responded with gratitude. And they asked again, how did he know what to do so quickly? The answer came from Claudia. Because he doesn't wait for the numbers to panic before he acts. He reads the signs before they become alarms. The near disaster wasn't reported to the media, not because it was hidden, but because it never became one. And quietly inside the team, the legend of Mike Carter grew even deeper. Engineers began consulting him before design changes. Contractors began asking for his second opinion. His notebook, now scanned and archived by the company as part of a new safety initiative called the Carter Protocol, a training program aimed at teaching engineers how to partner with field crews more effectively. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a philosophy, and it was working. The tower was now 75 stories tall. Its final glass panels were being installed. The elevators were operational. The rooftop garden had begun to take shape. For the city, it was just another skyscraper nearing completion. For Mike Carter, it was something else entirely. That morning, Mike arrived earlier than usual. The site was quiet. No trucks, no drills. Just the sound of a breeze brushing against unfinished walls and steel rails. He walked alone to the base of the structure, the same place where, months ago, he had asked a question that changed everything. He stood still. He looked up. What started as blueprints and stress had now become real. Concrete, glass, and steel rising into the sky, not because of just one idea, but because someone had dared to speak when silence was easier. A voice behind him broke the quiet. "This place has your name in its bones." Mike turned. It was Claudia, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might be here," she said, handing him one. "I just want to see it like this," Mike said softly. "Before the noise returns?" He nodded. They stood there, watching the tower stretch toward the clouds. Workers began arriving in the distance. The hum of machinery returned. The city awakened. "You know," Claudia said, "they want to name the new mentorship program after you." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Mentorship? We're launching it next quarter, pairing experienced site workers with engineering interns. One-on-one learning. Field-based. Hands-on. We already have 40 sign-ups." Mike was quiet. "You changed how we build," she said. "Not just the tower, but how we see each other." He looked at the building again. "I didn't mean to change anything. I just didn't want it to break." She smiled. "That's why it worked." Later that afternoon, during lunch break, a surprise announcement was made over the site speakers. "Attention team. Today marks 200 days without a safety incident. And in recognition of that, we're naming Bay for the foundation level the Carter Zone, the place where this building was truly saved." The entire crew erupted in applause. Mike, red-faced and overwhelmed, tried to wave it off. But deep down it meant something. Not because of the name, but because every worker on that site, engineer, welder, apprentice, electrician, knew what it meant. Mike didn't just stand on the ground. He stood for it. The tower's opening ceremony was just 2 weeks away. Final touches were being added, security systems tested, and landscaping crews were planting the last row of trees along the perimeter walk. As Mike walked past the new main lobby, still filled with scaffolding, he was stopped by a site administrator holding a thin envelope. "Mike," she said, "this came for you. Priority courier, official seal." He looked down. The envelope had a gold emblem on the upper left corner. Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, Washington, D.C. He furrowed his brow. Must be a mistake. "Nope," the admin smiled. "They asked for you by name." He opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter, signed and stamped. The opening line made him freeze. "We hereby invite Mr. Michael Carter to serve as a guest contributor and advisor on the upcoming National Council for Practical Engineering Initiatives." He kept reading. The letter explained that Mike's field-driven insights had sparked internal discussions across multiple agencies, that his drainage solution had been used as a case study in 8 states, and that the government wanted his voice, yes, his, for a new program aimed at bridging field labor and policy. Attached was a round-trip ticket to D.C., hotel arrangements, and a private access pass to the Capitol's infrastructure conference next month. When Mike looked up, the sun to the glass facade cast long shadows on the ground. He sat down on a nearby concrete bench and just breathed. This wasn't just about the tower anymore. This was about the people building the country, brick by brick, beam by beam, finally being seen. He folded the letter and placed it carefully into his notebook. Across the plaza, Roger saw him sitting alone and walked over. "You okay?" Roger asked. Mike looked up, half smiling. "I just got invited to Washington. They wanted to talk about bridges, about listening to workers, about things I never thought would leave this block of concrete." Roger chuckled. "You always said concrete talks. Turns out Washington listens too." As the day ended, Mike stood once more at the base of the tower. Workers were clocking out, packing up, laughing, heading home. He stayed a moment longer, and for the first time since this all began, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. He felt like part of something real, something that mattered, and something that, thanks to one question, had just begun to echo far beyond the skyline of Houston. It was the night before the grand opening. The skyscraper, now fully completed, stood tall over the city, its glass surface reflecting every light from the streets below. Finishing crews were long gone. Security teams walked their final rounds. And in just a few hours, Houston's newest skyline monument will be revealed to the world. Mike stood on the rooftop garden, alone, leaning on the railing with a view that stretched miles in every direction. The wind was soft, the sky clear. For a moment, the whole city felt quiet. He had come up here after hours, not for celebration, but for reflection. He looked down at the curved edge of the tower. Beneath it were the same foundation trenches he once poured with shovel in hand. The same place he had once stood, unsure if his question was worth asking. Now, that same question had built this. Claudia joined him, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. Again, "I had a feeling you'd be up here," she said. "Didn't want to miss the lights." She handed him the cup. "They go on in 5 minutes." They both turned toward the eastern face of the tower, where a large switch panel had been installed to activate the tower's lighting system, custom designed to reflect off every corner of the building in timed sequences. "You ready for tomorrow?" Claudia asked. Mike exhaled. "Not really. Not big on speeches." "Don't give one," she smiled. "Just do what you always do. Say what's true." He looked over the edge again, then checked his old watch. "It's time." Across the plaza below, a small crowd had gathered. Stakeholders, city officials, media crews, and dozens of workers who had helped raise the tower from dirt. Many of them pointed up to the rooftop, where they could see 2 small figures standing near the rail. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice said over the speakers below, "please join us in counting down to the official lighting of the Carter Tower." A pause. Then the crowd began. 5, 4... Mike looked at Claudia. "Wait, they're calling it." "Yes," she said. "You didn't know?" "No," he whispered. You didn't ask. 3, 2, 1. And with a soft electric hum, the tower lit up. Rows of soft golden lights raced upward along its structure, then burst outward at the peak in elegant spirals of white and blue. Spotlights swept the rooftop, then illuminated the ground far below in a perfect, symmetrical ring. The crowd gasped, phones flashed, cheers echoed across the plaza. And above it all, Mike Carter stood in silence, his name now attached to a structure that touched the clouds. Not because he demanded it, not because he built it alone, but because, when the moment came, he didn't stay silent. He asked, and in asking, he had changed everything. 3 months had passed since the tower lit up for the first time. By now, it was more than just a building. Tourists lined up to take photos. Local schools used it as a case study. Engineering firms referred to it as a breakthrough in collaborative site design. And a plaque at the lobby entrance quietly told a story many visitors stopped to read. This structure stands because someone asked the right question at the right time. Never underestimate the power of a single voice. M. Carter? Mike never asked them to put it there. He didn't even know they would. But he saw it one morning while walking through the lobby with a group of visiting interns. One of them pointed at it. "Wait, are you that Mike?" He nodded slowly. "I guess I am." He had just returned from his first trip to Washington, where he spoke at the National Infrastructure Council. Not with a speech, not with slides, just his notebook, his story, and the same honest tone he used on the job site. People listened. Policymakers took notes. And something shifted. A few weeks later, a new federal pilot program was launched, Boots to Blueprints. Its goal was to integrate field expertise into the design phase of major public projects. Mike's name was on the advisory board, not honorary, active. But despite the national attention, the interviews, the awards, Mike stayed the same. He still woke up early, still wore his old watch, still walked job sites in worn-out boots, and carried the same notebook with weathered corners. One afternoon, as he packed up his gear from a training session at a vocational school, a young apprentice walked up and asked, "Mr. Carter, what do you think makes someone ready for a big opportunity like yours?" Mike thought for a moment, then said quietly, "You don't wait to be ready. You just stay curious. And when the moment comes, you speak." He handed the kid a fresh notebook. "Start with this." And as he walked away, the boy opened it, and on the first page, Mike had written, "Ask when something doesn't feel right, even if no one else does." That was the legacy Mike Carter left behind. Not carved in granite, not written in formulas, but poured deep into the foundation of how we build and who we choose to listen to. From one question, to one tower, to a voice that would echo for generations.